Montana Territory, February 1883. The snow fell thick and silent across the northern Montana plains, blanketing everything in a white so pure it hurt to look at. The kind of white that made a man feel small, made him understand just how alone he really was in this vast territory where the wind howled like wolves and the cold could kill a man in his sleep. Ethan Reeves stood before a simple wooden grave marker beneath the old oak tree behind his cabin, his breath coming out in white clouds that disappeared into the gray dawn. His hands, rough and calloused from 4 years of working this land alone, held his hat against his chest. The wooden marker bore words he had carved himself with a knife that had belonged to his father, Sarah Reeves, 1850 to 1879, beloved wife and mother of our unborn child. 4 years, 1,460 days since he had buried his wife and the child she carried in her womb. 1,460 nights of sleeping alone in a bed that felt too big, too empty, too full of ghosts. "Sarah," Ethan said, his voice barely more than a whisper against the wind. "It's been 4 years today. Our child would be 4 years old now, running around this cabin, laughing, learning to read, learning to help with the chores." He paused, swallowing hard against the tightness in his throat. "But you're both gone, and I'm still here, still trying to figure out why." The memory came unbidden, as it always did on this anniversary. Sarah heavy with child, her belly round beneath her dress, her face pale with the consumption that had been eating her alive from the inside. The desperate ride through a blizzard worse than this one, 40 miles to the nearest doctor, his horse nearly dead by the time he arrived. The doctor's face when Ethan begged him to come, begged him to save his wife, his child. The slow shake of the head, too far, too late, too much snow. When Ethan had ridden back, pushing his exhausted horse through drifts that came up to the animal's chest, he had found Sarah cold in their bed, the child dead inside her. He had buried them both beneath this oak tree because Sarah had always loved the way the leaves turned gold in autumn. "I made you a promise," Ethan continued, his fingers white-knuckled around the brim of his hat. "I promised I would keep this land. The Homestead Act gave me 160 acres if I could work it for 5 years. I started the count the day after you died. 4 years down. 1 more year to go. Then this land will be mine forever. Our land, yours and mine, and the child we never got to meet." He placed his hat back on his head, his eyes lingering on the grave marker. "After that year is up, I don't know what I'll do. Don't know why I'll keep going, but I'll finish what I started. That much I can promise you." The wind picked up, sending a fresh wave of snow across the grave. Ethan turned away, pulling his buffalo hide coat tighter around his shoulders. The coat had cost him 2 months of work, but out here in Montana Territory, where winter could last 6 months and the temperature could drop to 30 below zero, a good coat meant the difference between life and death. His cabin sat 50 yards away, smoke rising from the stone chimney he had built with his own hands. It was a simple structure, logs chinked with mud and moss, a single room with a loft for storage. Not much to look at, but it was solid, warm, and paid for with sweat and blood and 4 years of backbreaking labor. Ethan had built the fence line himself, 3 miles of posts and rails surrounding his property. He had cleared 15 acres for wheat, another 10 for corn. He raised sheep for wool, chickens for eggs, and kept 2 horses for working the land. It was a hard life, a lonely life, but it was his life. And he had carved it out of this unforgiving wilderness with nothing but his 2 hands and a stubborn refusal to give up. He walked toward the east fence line, his boots crunching through snow that came up past his knees. The storm the night before had been fierce, knocking down fence posts and scattering his sheep. He needed to repair the damage before another storm rolled in, and out here another storm was always rolling in. The sun was barely up, painting the snow in shades of pink and gold. In summer, this land was beautiful, rolling grasslands stretching as far as a man could see, wildflowers covering the hills in waves of purple and yellow. But in winter, it was brutal, unforgiving, a test of will and endurance that broke weaker men and sent them running back to the civilized East. Ethan reached the fence line and began inspecting the damage. 15 posts down, rails scattered across the snow. He would need to dig new post holes, and in this frozen ground, That meant hours of hard work with a pickaxe and shovel. He sighed, already feeling the ache in his back that the work would bring. That was when he saw them. Footprints in the snow, small footprints the size a child would make. They staggered across the white expanse in an uneven line, the distance between prints growing wider, more erratic. The gait of someone stumbling, falling, getting up, stumbling again. Ethan's heart began to beat faster. No child should be out here, not in this weather, not this far from any settlement. The nearest town was Red Creek, 20 miles to the south, and there were no homesteads between here and there except for Harvey Mills's place, and Harvey had no children. He followed the footprints east, moving faster now, his breath coming harder. The prints led him away from the fence line into a stand of pine trees that bordered his property. And there, painted across the white snow like a wound, he saw it. Blood. A trail of bright red drops following the footprints, growing thicker, more frequent. Ethan broke into a run, his boots kicking up sprays of snow. He crashed through the underbrush, following the blood trail deeper into the pines. The snow was deeper here, sheltered from the wind, and the blood stood out like rubies scattered across white silk. And then he saw her. A little girl, no more than 6 years old, lay curled beneath a pine tree, nearly buried in a drift. Her skin had the dusky tone of the Apache people, her long black hair tangled with snow and ice. She wore a buckskin dress, torn and soaked through, offering no protection against the killing cold. Her lips were purple, her tiny body shaking with tremors that came slower and slower, the kind of shaking that came right before a body gave up entirely. Her eyes were closed, her breathing so shallow Ethan could barely see her chest move. "Oh God," Ethan whispered, dropping to his knees beside the child. "Oh God, no, not again. Please, not again." He placed 2 fingers against the side of her neck, feeling for a pulse. It was there but faint, so faint, beating maybe 40 times a minute when it should have been twice that. Her skin was ice cold, cold as death. And when Ethan pulled back her torn dress, he saw a deep gash in her left leg, the wound at least 2 inches long, the blood frozen in dark crusts around the edges. 4 years ago, he had been too slow to save Sarah and their child. 4 years ago, he had ridden through a blizzard and arrived too late. 4 years ago, he had made a promise on Sarah's grave that he would never again let someone die because he was not fast enough, not strong enough, not good enough. Today would not be that day. Ethan tore off his buffalo hide coat, the cold hitting him like a physical blow. He wrapped the coat around the child's body, lifting her with arms that shook not from cold, but from fear. She weighed almost nothing, a bundle of bones and frozen flesh, and when her head lolled against his chest, he could feel how cold she was even through his shirt. "Stay with me," he said, his voice rough. "You hear me? Stay with me. Don't you dare give up. Don't you dare die." He turned and ran back toward his cabin, the child clutched against his chest, trying to share whatever body heat he had left. The snow seemed deeper now, the distance longer, every step an eternity. His lungs burned with the cold air, his arms ached with the effort of holding the child steady, but he did not slow down, did not stop, did not let himself think about what would happen if he was too late again. The cabin loomed ahead, smoke still rising from the chimney. Ethan kicked open the door, stumbling inside, his whole body shaking now from cold and exertion and fear. The fire in the stone hearth had burned down to coals. He laid the child on the rug before the fireplace and immediately began feeding wood into the hearth, big logs of mesquite that would burn hot and fast. The flames caught, spreading, filling the cabin with heat and light. Ethan turned back to the child, his hands working quickly, efficiently, drawing on knowledge learned from years of living alone, where the nearest doctor was a day's ride away, and a man learned to be his own physician, or died. He cut away the torn buckskin dress with his knife, revealing the full extent of her injuries. The gash in her leg was deep, cut all the way to the muscle, probably from a sharp piece of ice or a broken branch. There were other wounds too, smaller cuts and scrapes covering her arms and legs, bruises darkening her ribs. This child had been running through the wilderness, running hard, running from something. Ethan grabbed his whiskey bottle from the shelf, the good whiskey he saved for special occasions, and poured it over the leg wound. The child's eyes flew open and she screamed, a sound so full of pain and terror that it made Ethan's chest ache. But the whiskey was necessary. Out here, infection killed as surely as cold, and whiskey was the best disinfectant a man had. He worked quickly, cleaning the wound, packing it with clean linen bandages torn from one of his spare shirts. He wrapped her leg tightly, tight enough to stop the bleeding, but not so tight as to cut off circulation. Then he wrapped her in every blanket he owned, piling them on top of her until only her face showed. A small brown face with high cheekbones and eyes that stared at him with a mix of fear and confusion. "You're safe," Ethan said, his voice gentler now, softer. "You're safe now. I'm not going to hurt you." He did not know if she understood English, but he kept talking anyway, his voice low and soothing as he prepared warm broth from the venison stew he had made the day before. He heated the broth over the fire until it was warm but not hot, then knelt beside the child and lifted her head, spooning the broth carefully into her mouth. She swallowed, coughed, swallowed again. Her eyes never left his face, watching him with the wariness of a wild animal, ready to bolt despite her injuries. "That's it," Ethan murmured. "That's good. Just a little more. You need to get warm from the inside out." He fed her slowly, patiently, letting her set the pace. After a few minutes, her shaking began to ease, the color returning to her lips. She was young, and the young were resilient in ways that made old men like him envious. She would survive this. She had to survive this. When she had eaten as much as she could, Ethan laid her head back down on the folded blanket he was using as a pillow. Her eyes were still open, still watching him, but there was less fear in them now, less panic. She was starting to understand that he meant her no harm. "My name is Ethan," he said, pointing to himself. "Ethan. Can you tell me your name?" The child's lips moved, forming words in a language Ethan did not understand, the flowing syllables of the Apache tongue. He shook his head. "I don't speak Apache," he said, "but we'll figure it out. We have time." The child's eyes began to close, exhaustion overtaking her. Ethan sat back on his heels, watching her sleep, and felt the weight of what he had just done settle on his shoulders. He had just brought an Apache child into his home. In Montana Territory in the year 1883, that was not just an act of kindness, it was a crime. The Indian Appropriations Act of 1871 had stripped the Apache and other tribes of their sovereignty, declared them wards of the federal government, and ordered them confined to reservations. Any Apache found outside a reservation could be rounded up and sent back by force, and any white man harboring Apache could be charged with violating federal law. But as Ethan looked at the sleeping child, at her small face relaxed in sleep, at the bandages wrapped around her injured leg, he found he did not care about federal law. He had made a promise on Sarah's grave. He would not let another child die, not on his watch, not ever again. The day wore on. Ethan kept the fire burning high, kept the cabin warm, and checked on the child every few minutes. She slept deeply, the sleep of complete exhaustion, her breathing slow and steady. By midday, her color had improved significantly, the deathly pallor replaced by a healthier brown. Ethan was splitting wood outside, preparing for the long, cold night ahead, when he heard it. A sound that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. A low, guttural growl, like an animal in pain, coming from the tree line north of his cabin. He set down his axe and turned, his hand moving instinctively to the knife at his belt. The snow was falling again, thick flakes that limited visibility. But through the white curtain, he saw movement. A figure stumbling toward him, tall and broad-shouldered, moving with the determination of someone running on will alone. As the figure came closer, Ethan felt his breath catch. It was a woman, and she was the tallest woman he had ever seen, easily 6 feet tall, with shoulders as wide as a man's and arms roped with muscle. She wore torn buckskin clothing, and her body was covered in wounds, wounds that made the child's injuries look minor by comparison. A deep slash ran from her left shoulder down to her collarbone, the wound so deep Ethan could see white bone through the blood. Her right side bore a bullet wound, a clean hole punched through her ribs, blood seeping steadily from both entry and exit wounds. Her right thigh had a long gash, 6 inches at least, and her hands were covered in cuts and scratches. But it was her eyes that stopped Ethan cold. Dark eyes filled with pain and rage and a mother's desperate fear. Those eyes locked onto him, and the woman's lips pulled back in a snarl. "Where is she?" the woman demanded, her English heavily accented but clear. "Where is my daughter?" She held an Apache knife in her right hand, the blade 9 inches of sharpened steel, and despite her wounds, despite the blood loss that should have dropped her where she stood, she moved toward Ethan with deadly intent. Ethan raised his hands, palms out, showing he held no weapon. "Inside," he said, keeping his voice calm, level. "She's inside, alive, safe. You need to come inside before you collapse." The woman took another step forward, the knife steady in her hand. "Why would a white man save an Apache child?" she spat. "White men kill Apache. White men burn our villages. White men kill our children." Ethan met her eyes, holding her gaze, letting her see the truth in his face. "I didn't save an Apache child," he said quietly. "I saved a child who was dying in the snow, that's all. Just a child. Now put down the knife and come inside before you bleed to death in my yard." The woman stared at him for a long moment, her body swaying slightly, the blood loss finally catching up to her. Then her eyes rolled back in her head, and she collapsed, the knife falling from her hand as she hit the snow. Ethan was moving before she hit the ground, catching her before her head struck the frozen earth. She was heavy, solid muscle and bone, heavier than any woman he had ever carried. But he managed to get his arms under her and lift. Her blood soaked into his shirt, warm against his chest, and he could feel how shallow her breathing was, how weak her pulse. He carried her inside, laying her on his bed, the bed where Sarah had died 4 years ago. The child was still asleep by the fire, undisturbed by the commotion. Ethan turned his attention to the woman, his hands moving with practiced efficiency. The shoulder wound was the worst, a sword or axe cut that had nearly severed the muscle. Ethan poured whiskey over it, and even unconscious, the woman's body jerked with pain. He threaded catgut through a needle, heated the needle in the fire to sterilize it, and began to sew. 16 stitches, each one pulling the torn flesh together, closing the wound as best he could. The bullet wound was cleaner. The bullet had gone straight through, missing vital organs by what looked like inches. Ethan packed both holes with carbolic acid-soaked linen, a disinfectant he had ordered from a catalog last year. It was expensive, but out here, infection killed more people than bullets did. The thigh wound required another 12 stitches. By the time Ethan finished, his hands were shaking with exhaustion, and the woman's blood covered his arms up to the elbows. But the bleeding had slowed to a trickle, the wounds were clean, and her breathing had stabilized. He sat back, wiping sweat from his forehead despite the cold, and looked at the 2 Apache women now in his care. Mother and daughter, he guessed. Both of them had been running from something, running so hard they had nearly run themselves to death. A sound from the bed made him turn. The woman's eyes were open, staring at him with that same mix of wariness and pain. Her hand moved slowly, reaching out, and Ethan realized she was reaching toward the child. "She's safe," Ethan said again. "Your daughter is safe." The woman's arm dropped, too weak to hold up. Her lips moved, forming words in Apache, words Ethan could not understand. But then she switched to English, her voice barely a whisper. "Kiona," she said. "Her name is Kiona. It means brown hills in our tongue." "Kiona," Ethan repeated, trying the name on his tongue. "That's a good name." The woman's eyes filled with tears, the first sign of vulnerability she had shown. "Wait, I'm going to ask, what will save us? We are nothing to you." Ethan was silent for a moment, his eyes moving to the window, to the oak tree visible in the distance, to the grave beneath its branches. 4 years ago, he said slowly, my wife died. She was pregnant. The baby died with her. I rode 40 miles through a blizzard trying to find a doctor, but I was too slow, too late. I buried them both beneath that oak tree out there. He turned back to the woman, meeting her eyes. I made a promise on her grave. I promised I would never again be too slow, too late, too weak to save someone who needed saving. Your daughter needed saving, so I saved her. It's as simple as that. The woman stared at him, something shifting in her dark eyes, some of the hardness melting away. My name is Maka, she said. It means earth. I am of the Chiricahua Apache. Ethan Reeves, he replied, and you're welcome to stay here as long as you need to heal. Maka's eyes closed again, exhaustion pulling her back under. But before she slipped into sleep, She whispered 2 words. Thank you. Ethan stood, looking down at mother and daughter, at 2 lives he had pulled back from the edge of death. Outside, the snow continued to fall, and somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, its cry lonely and wild. The storm lasted 3 days. 3 days during which Ethan played nursemaid to 2 patients who drifted in and out of consciousness, burned through his supply of firewood at an alarming rate, and began to understand just how much trouble he had invited into his life. On the second day, Kiona woke fully, her dark eyes bright with fever but aware. She saw Ethan and immediately scrambled backward, pressing herself against the wall, making small, frightened sounds in her throat. It's all right, Ethan said, keeping his distance, his voice gentle. I'm not going to hurt you. Your mother is here. See? He pointed to the bed where Maka lay sleeping. Kiona's eyes followed his gesture, and when she saw her mother, she let out a small cry and tried to stand. Her injured leg gave out, and she would have fallen if Ethan had not caught her. She froze in his arms, her whole body going rigid with fear. Ethan set her down carefully on the floor and stepped back, giving her space. Your leg is hurt, he said. You need to rest. Let me help you to your mother. He held out his hand. Kiona stared at it, then at his face, then at his hand again. Slowly, hesitantly, she reached out and placed her small hand in his large one. Her grip was tight, her palms sweaty with fear, but she let him help her hobble to the bed where Maka lay. Maka's eyes opened to the sound of Kiona's voice. Mother and daughter stared at each other for a moment, and then Kiona collapsed onto the bed, burying her face in her mother's neck, her small body shaking with sobs. Maka's arms came up, wrapping around her daughter, holding her close despite the pain it must have caused her wounds. They spoke in Apache, rapid-fire words Ethan could not follow, but he did not need to understand the language to understand the emotion. Relief, love, grief, and all of it poured out in those whispered words, in the way they clung to each other like drowning people clinging to driftwood. Ethan turned away, giving them privacy, and busied himself making more broth. When he brought it to them, Maka looked at him with eyes that held a depth of gratitude he had rarely seen. You saved her, Maka said. You saved my daughter. I did what anyone would have done, Ethan replied. No, Maka said firmly. Not anyone. Not white men. White men kill Apache children. They do not save them. Ethan had no answer to that because she was right. The history between white settlers and the Apache was written in blood on both sides, a history of violence and betrayal that went back generations. On the third day, as the storm finally began to ease, Maka was strong enough to sit up, to eat solid food, to tell her story, and it was a story that made Ethan's blood run cold. 2 weeks ago, Maka's tribe, a band of 52 Chiricahua Apache, had been living in a small valley near the Little Bighorn River. They were not hostile, had not attacked any settlers, had simply been trying to live their lives on land that had been theirs for generations. Then the hired guns came. 15 men led by a former cavalry lieutenant named Marcus Cole, men paid by the Northern Pacific Railway Company to clear the land of Apache so the railroad could lay track through the valley. They attacked at night, burning lodges, shooting anyone who ran. They killed everyone, Maka said, her voice flat, emotionless, the way people sound when they are describing something too terrible for emotion. The elders, the children, anyone too slow to run, they killed them all. She had hidden Kiona in a small cave, covering the entrance with branches, then run in the opposite direction to draw the killers away. She had fought using her knife and her bow and had killed 4 men before a bullet caught her in the side. But she had escaped into the forest, had hidden in the darkness, bleeding and alone. For 2 days I looked for Kiona, Maka said. 2 days without food, without water, following her tracks. She had left the cave. She was trying to find me. She was scared and alone and running through the wilderness. Her voice cracked on that last word, and she pulled Kiona closer. I found her tracks leading here, to your land, and then I collapsed at your door. I thought I would die. I thought I would never see my daughter again. But you saved her. You saved us both. Ethan was silent, processing this information. 52 people murdered for railroad land, children killed in their beds. A mother and daughter hunted through the wilderness like animals. This man, Cole, Ethan said, He's still out there? Maka nodded. He will be looking for me. He will be looking for Kiona. He leaves no witnesses. The railway company pays him $100 for every Apache he kills. We are worth $200 to him. Then you'll stay here, Ethan said. Both of you. You'll stay here until you're strong enough to travel, and then I'll help you get to safety. You cannot, Maka said. It is too dangerous. If they find us here, they will kill you too. Let them try, Ethan replied. The storm ended on the fourth day, and with it came trouble riding a sorrel horse and wearing a sheriff's badge. Sheriff Clyde Morgan was a fat man with a brown beard and small, mean eyes that moved constantly, taking in everything, missing nothing. He worked for the town of Red Creek 20 miles south, and everyone knew he took money from Marcus Cole to look the other way when Cole and his men did their dirty work. Ethan heard the horse coming and stepped outside, closing the cabin door firmly behind him. Maka and Kiona were hidden inside, and he intended to keep them that way. Morning, Sheriff, Ethan said evenly. Ethan Reeves, Morgan said, not bothering with pleasantries. I heard you might be harboring Apache. That true? Who told you that? Ethan asked. Got reports of tracks leading to your property. Apache tracks, woman and child. You seen them? I've seen tracks, Ethan said. Animals mostly. Coyotes, deer, nothing human. Morgan's eyes narrowed. You sure about that? Because harboring Indians is a federal crime, Ethan. The Indian Appropriations Act of 1871 says all Apache must live on reservations. Any found off-reservation can be rounded up and sent back, and anyone helping them hide can face serious consequences. He leaned forward in his saddle, his voice dropping. You're in your 5th year of homesteading, aren't you? 1 more year and this land is yours free and clear. Be a shame if you did something stupid that made you lose it all. The threat was clear. Cooperate or lose everything. Ethan met the sheriff's eyes, his face expressionless. I appreciate the warning, Sheriff, but like I said, I haven't seen any Apache. Just snow and cold and too much work for one man to handle. Morgan stared at him for a long moment, then spat tobacco juice into the snow. I'll be back in 3 days with a warrant to search this property. If I find anything you don't want me finding, you'll be arrested. Think about that, Ethan. Think real hard. He turned his horse and rode away, leaving Ethan standing in the snow, watching him go. When Ethan went back inside, Maka was standing by the window. Kiona held tight in her arms. Her face was pale, her eyes frightened in a way they had not been even when she was bleeding from bullet wounds. We must go, she said. We must leave now before he comes back. No, Ethan said firmly. You're too weak. Kiona's too weak. You'd both die out there. Better to die out there than to let you lose your land because of us, Maka said. Ethan crossed the room, standing in front of her, forcing her to meet his eyes. 4 years ago, I let my wife and child die because I wasn't fast enough, wasn't strong enough, wasn't good enough. I've lived with that guilt for 1,460 days. I will not add your deaths to that burden. I will not let you and Kiona die. Maka's eyes filled with tears. Why, she whispered, why would you risk everything for us? We are strangers. We are nothing to you. Ethan was quiet for a moment, thinking about Sarah's grave beneath the oak tree, about the promise he had made, about the emptiness that had filled his life since she died. My wife used to say that strangers are just family you haven't met yet, he said finally. Maybe you and Kiona are the family I needed to meet. Maybe this is why I'm still here. Maybe this is what I'm supposed to do. That evening, as the sun set and painted the snow in shades of gold and red, Kiona came and stood beside Ethan as he prepared dinner. She watched him work for a while, then tugged on his sleeve. When he looked down, she pointed at herself. Kiona, she said clearly. Then she pointed at him, her head tilted questioningly. Ethan, he said. My name is Ethan. She tried the name, her tongue stumbling over the unfamiliar sounds. Etan. Close enough, he said with a small smile. Kiona smiled back, the first real smile he had seen from her, and something in Ethan's chest that had been frozen for 4 years began to thaw, just a little. That night, with both mother and daughter sleeping peacefully in his cabin, Ethan sat by the fire and stared into the flames. He knew what was coming. Sheriff Morgan would be back with more men, with warrants, with the full weight of federal law behind him. Marcus Cole and his killers were still out there, hunting for the two Apache women Ethan had sworn to protect. He was one man against forces he could not hope to defeat. One man with a farm to protect, a promise to keep, and two lives that depended on him making the right choices. But as he looked at Kiona sleeping by the fire, at Maka resting in his bed, at the small family that had found its way to his door, through snow and blood and desperation, Ethan Reeves made a decision. He would not run. He would not give up. He would not let them take these two souls back into the darkness. Whatever came, whatever the climb, he would fight. Because 4 years ago, he had failed to save the people he loved. But that failure had taught him something important. Sometimes the only way to redeem the past was to fight like hell for the present. And Ethan Reeves was done running from his past. The war was coming, whether he wanted it or not, and when it came, he would be ready. The first 3 days after Sheriff Morgan's visit passed in a strange rhythm of domestic routine and underlying tension. Ethan worked the land as he always had, repairing fence posts damaged by the storm, checking on his small herd of sheep, splitting enough firewood to last through another blizzard. But now, every sound made him reach for his rifle. Every movement in the tree line made his heart race. Inside the cabin, Maka grew stronger by the hour. Her wounds were healing clean, no signs of infection despite the severity of her injuries. She was Apache, born and raised in this harsh territory, and her body knew how to survive what would kill softer people. By the end of the first week, she could walk without assistance, though she moved carefully, protecting her wounded side. Kiona was resilient in the way only children could be. Her leg wound was healing well under Ethan's careful tending, and she had begun to move around the cabin with increasing confidence. She watched Ethan constantly, studying him with dark eyes that missed nothing, learning his routines, his habits, the way he moved through his day. On the third morning, Ethan was teaching Kiona to count in English using dried beans from his stores. He would place beans on the table, and she would count them in her soft, accented voice. 1, 2, 2, 3. Her small finger pointed at each bean with intense concentration. When she reached 5 without error, she looked up at him with such pride that Ethan felt his throat tighten. "Good," he said, his voice rough. "That's very good, Kiona." She beamed at him, and for just a moment, Ethan allowed himself to imagine what it might have been like if Sarah had lived, if their child had been born healthy and whole. Would their daughter have looked at him like this? Would she have learned her numbers sitting at the same table? Maka watched from the bed, her eyes following every interaction between Ethan and her daughter. There was something in her gaze that Ethan could not quite read. Wariness still, yes, but something else too. Something softer. "You are good with children," Maka said quietly. "You would have been a good father." The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. He turned away, busying himself with putting the beans back in their jar. "Sarah and I were going to name our child Hope if it was a girl," he said, his back still turned. "We thought about names for months, argued about them good-naturedly. She wanted Hope, I wanted Grace. We never did agree." He paused, his hand stilling on the jar. "In the end, we never got to name our child at all." Silence filled the cabin, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Then Maka spoke again, her voice carrying a weight of shared grief. "I understand loss," she said. "My husband died 3 years ago. Cholera swept through our village. He was strong, a warrior, a good man. But the sickness did not care about strength. He died in 2 days, burning with fever, his body wasting away to nothing." She looked down at Kiona, her hand stroking her daughter's dark hair. "I raised Kiona alone, taught her to track, to hunt, to survive. I taught her to be strong like her father, but I could not teach her to be safe. Because in this world, in this time, there is no safety for our people." Ethan turned back to face her, seeing her clearly for perhaps the first time. Not just a wounded Apache woman, not just someone he was obligated to help, but a person, a mother, a widow, someone who understood what it meant to lose everything and keep going anyway. "Tell me what happened," he said. "Tell me everything about the attack on your village." Maka was quiet for a long moment, her eyes distant, seeing things that were not in this cabin. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady, but Ethan could hear the pain underneath. We were in our winter camp in the Little Bighorn Valley. 52 people. Not a large band, not warriors or raiders, just families trying to survive the winter. We had made peace with the soldiers at Fort Ellis. We thought we were safe. She paused, her jaw tightening. Marcus Cole came on a night with no moon. 15 men, all hired killers. They worked for the Northern Pacific Railway Company. The company wanted our land for their railroad tracks. They had offered to buy the land, but the elders refused. The land was sacred. The bones of our ancestors were buried there. You do not sell the bones of your ancestors. Kiona had gone still, listening to her mother's words, even though she must have heard this story before. Her small hand reached out, gripping Ethan's sleeve as if anchoring herself. Cole did not care about sacred land or ancestors' bones, Maka continued. He cared about $100 per Apache head. That is what the railway company paid him. $100 for each of us he killed. Her voice went flat, emotionless, the way soldiers sounded when describing battle. They set fire to the lodges. When people ran out, they shot them. Children, elders, women. It did not matter. They killed everyone who moved. The horror of it settled over the cabin like a shroud. Ethan had seen violence in his life, had fought in bar brawls, had shot men who tried to steal his livestock. But the cold-blooded murder of an entire village, including children, was beyond his comprehension. I heard the first shots and knew what was happening, Maka said. I grabbed Kiona and ran to a cave we sometimes use for storage. I hid her in the back, covered the entrance with branches, and made her promise to stay silent no matter what she heard. She looked at her daughter, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Then I ran the other way, away from the cave, making noise, leaving obvious tracks. I wanted them to chase me. I wanted them to forget about looking for survivors. You drew them away, Ethan said quietly. Yes, and they came. 4 men followed me into the forest. I had my knife and my bow. I am not a warrior, but I am Apache, and the Apache do not die easily. Pride crept into her voice, cold and hard. I killed the first man with an arrow through his throat. The second I killed with my knife when he came too close. The third and fourth I fought together. I killed one, wounded the other, but the wounded one shot me before he ran. She touched her side where the bullet wound was slowly healing. I hid in the forest for 2 days. No food, no water, just pain and fear. When I finally went back to the village, everyone was dead. The lodges were burned. The bodies were left where they fell for the scavengers. Her voice broke on that last word, and she had to pause to collect herself. I found the cave where I had hidden Kiona. She was gone. The branches had been pushed aside. I saw her small footprints leading away from the camp, heading east. She had heard the shots stop and thought it was safe to come out. She had gone looking for me. Maka's hands clenched into fists. For 2 more days I tracked her. I was bleeding, weak, but I could not stop. I followed her tracks through the wilderness, watching them grow more erratic, more desperate. I knew she was lost. I knew she was scared. I knew she was dying. She looked at Ethan, and now the tears did fall, tracking down her weathered cheeks. And then her tracks led here, to your land, to your cabin. And I thought I was too late. I thought you were another white man who would kill Apache on sight. I came here ready to die trying to save my daughter. But I didn't kill her, Ethan said softly. No, you saved her. You saved us both. And I do not understand why. Ethan was quiet, thinking about his answer. Finally, he said the only thing that felt true. Because 4 years ago, I couldn't save my family. Maybe this is my chance to save someone else's. The moment hung between them, heavy with meaning, with shared loss, with the beginning of something that neither of them quite knew how to name. It was Kiona who broke the silence. She tugged on Ethan's sleeve again, pointed at him, then at Maka, then made a gesture that encompassed the cabin. Home, she asked in English, her pronunciation careful. Ethan looked at Maka. Maka looked back at him. And in that shared glance, something unspoken passed between them. Yes, Ethan said finally. Home. On the 5th day, the rhythm of their strange new life was shattered by a knock on the door. Ethan opened it to find Harvey Mills standing on his porch, holding a basket covered with a cloth. Harvey was 40 years old, thin as a rail, with sunken eyes and hands that trembled slightly. He owned the homestead 15 miles to the west, raised sheep like Ethan did, and generally kept to himself. Ethan had spoken to him perhaps a dozen times in 4 years, brief conversations about weather and wool prices and nothing more. "Morning, Ethan," Harvey said, his voice nervous. "Brought you some smoked meat and bread. Figured you might need supplies after that storm." Ethan did not move from the doorway, did not invite Harvey inside. "That's kind of you, Harvey. I appreciate it." Harvey shifted his weight, his eyes trying to see past Ethan into the cabin. "Heard Sheriff Morgan was out here. Heard he was asking about Apache." Sheriff asks about a lot of things," Ethan said evenly. "Thing is," Harvey continued, lowering his voice, "I heard there might be a Apache on your property. Woman and child. And I wanted you to know that if that's true, I want to help." Every instinct Ethan had screamed danger. This was too convenient, too pat, but he kept his face neutral. "Why would you want to help?" he asked. Harvey's nervous hands twisted the edge of his coat. "My wife Martha, she's sick. Got the consumption, same as your Sarah did. Doctor says she needs $300 worth of medicine and treatment or she'll die by summer." He looked up at Ethan, his eyes pleading. "I don't have $300. I barely have $3. I owe Marcus Cole $200 from a bad loan I took out last year. If I don't pay, he's going to take my land. I'm desperate, Ethan. I'm drowning, and I thought maybe if I helped you, maybe you'd pay me something. Anything." There it was, the real reason. Harvey needed money, and desperation made men do foolish things. "I don't have any money to give you," Ethan said, "and I don't have any Apache hiding here, Ma, but I appreciate the offer." Harvey's face fell. He nodded slowly, started to turn away, then stopped. "Cole's putting together a group, 20 men. He's planning to search every homestead within 30 miles of where the Apache were last seen. He's going to be here in 3 days, Ethan. 3 days, and he won't ask politely to search. He'll just do it." The warning delivered, Harvey walked away, climbing onto his horse and riding off into the gray morning. Ethan closed the door and found Maka standing behind him, her face pale. "We have to leave," she said. "We have to leave now." "No," Ethan said firmly. "You're still too weak. Kiona's leg isn't fully healed. You wouldn't make it 10 miles in this cold." "Then what do we do?" Maka demanded, fear making her voice sharp. "Wait for Cole to come and kill us all?" Ethan walked to his bed, knelt down, and pulled out a wooden box he kept hidden beneath it. Inside were papers, legal papers, documents he had saved for years, knowing that someday he might need them. "There's another way," he said slowly, an idea forming in his mind. "A legal way." He pulled out a document, read it carefully, then looked at Maka. "Under the Homestead Act, I have the right to claim this land. And under coverture law, a married woman falls under her husband's legal protection. She has the right to live on his land, protected by his rights." Maka stared at him, not understanding. "If you were my wife," Ethan said carefully, "legally married, then you would have the legal right to be here. Cole couldn't force you to leave without going through me first. And Kiona, if we claimed her as my adopted daughter through the marriage, would also be protected." "You want to marry me," Maka said slowly, "for legal protection." "Not just legal protection," Ethan said, surprising himself with the honesty. "I want you and Kiona to stay. I want you to be safe. This is the best way I know to make that happen." Maka was silent for a long time, her eyes searching his face. "Do you love me?" she asked finally. Ethan considered lying, then decided she deserved the truth. "I don't know what love is anymore. Sarah died and I buried my heart with her. But I know I want you here. I know I wake up every morning and my first thought is whether you and Kiona are safe. I know that when I think about you leaving, something in my chest hurts in a way I haven't felt since Sarah died. Maybe that's not love, but maybe it's enough." Maka's eyes glistened, but she did not cry. "In my tribe," she said, "marriage is not about love at first. It is about partnership, about choosing someone to stand beside through all things, about building something together that neither could build alone." She stepped closer to him. "You have chosen to stand beside me when any other man would have turned away. You have risked everything to protect my daughter. That is the kind of man worth standing beside." She held out her hand. I will marry you, Ethan Reeves. Not because I must, but because I choose to. Ethan took her hand, feeling the calluses on her palm, the strength in her grip. It was not the soft hand of Sarah, who had been raised in a city and taught to be gentle. This was the hand of a woman who had fought for her life and won, who had tracked her daughter through a wilderness that would have killed lesser people, who had survived when survival should have been impossible. Then we'll do it right, Ethan said. We'll make it legal so no one can say otherwise. That afternoon, Ethan rode to Red Creek, to the small church on the edge of town where Father Daniel O'Brien served a congregation of ranchers and miners and settlers trying to carve civilization out of wilderness. Father O'Brien was 58 years old with white hair and kind eyes that had seen too much suffering. He listened to Ethan's request without interruption, his weathered hands folded on his desk. "You want to marry an Apache woman," he said when Ethan finished. "Yes." "And you're doing this to protect her from Marcus Cole and his men?" "Yes." "Does she know this is primarily a legal arrangement?" "She knows," Ethan said. "We talked about it. We're both going into this with open eyes." Father O'Brien was quiet for a moment, then sighed. "I've known Marcus Cole for 5 years. He is a man who has forgotten what it means to be human. He kills without remorse, destroys without thought, and sleeps soundly at night. If you marry this woman, you make yourself his enemy. You understand that?" "I understand. You could lose your land, your life, everything you have worked for." "I know." Father O'Brien studied Ethan's face, looking for doubt, for hesitation. He found none. "Then I will marry you," he said finally, "because sometimes the law is wrong, and the only way to fight wrong law is with right action." "When do you want the ceremony?" "Tomorrow," Ethan said, "before Cole comes." The next morning dawned clear and cold, the kind of morning where the sun turned the snow into a field of diamonds and the air hurt to breathe. Father O'Brien arrived at Ethan's cabin just after sunrise, riding a gray mare and carrying a worn Bible. Inside the cabin, Maka wore her clean buckskin dress, the tears mended with careful stitches. She had braided her long black hair and stood straight despite her healing wounds, every inch the warrior woman she was. Kiona stood beside her mother, one small hand gripping Maka's dress, her eyes wide and solemn. There were no flowers, no white dress, no guests except for Harvey Mills, who had agreed to serve as witness despite his obvious nervousness. The cabin smelled of wood smoke and coffee, and morning light streamed through the single window, painting everything in shades of gold. Father O'Brien opened his Bible, but before he began the ceremony, he looked at both Ethan and Maka. "Marriage is not just a legal contract," he said quietly. "It is a covenant, a promise made before God and witnesses that you will stand together through all things, good times and bad, sickness and health, joy and sorrow. It is not something to be entered into lightly, even when the reasons seem purely practical." He paused, letting his words sink in. "So I ask you both now, before we begin, are you doing this only for legal protection? Or is there more to it than that?" Ethan looked at Maka. Maka looked back at him. And in that shared glance, Ethan realized something he had been too afraid to admit, even to himself. Somewhere in the past week, somewhere between binding her wounds and teaching her daughter to count, somewhere between shared stories of loss and quiet moments by the fire, something had changed. He cared about this woman, not because she needed protection, not because he felt obligated, but because she was strong and brave and fierce, because she loved her daughter with a devotion that reminded him of Sarah, because when she looked at him, he felt like maybe he was worth something after all. "There's more to it than legal protection," Ethan said, his voice steady. "I want her to stay, not just for 3 days until Cole gives up, forever. I want to build something with her. With Kiona, I want to be a family." Maka's breath caught, and she squeezed his hand tighter. "I want that too," she said. "I want a home where my daughter can grow up safe, where she can learn to read and count and be something more than a hunted animal. And I want it with you." Father O'Brien smiled, the first real smile Ethan had seen from him. "Then let us begin." The ceremony was simple. No long speeches, no elaborate vows, just the essential words that bound two lives together. "Ethan Reeves, do you take Maka to be your wife, to protect her in all circumstances, to honor her choices, to stand beside her through whatever comes?" "I do," Ethan said. Maka, do you take Ethan Reeves to be your husband, to support him in all challenges, to share his burdens, to stand beside him through whatever comes? I do, Maka said, her English clear and strong. Before God and these witnesses, I declare you husband and wife. There was no ring. Ethan had nothing valuable enough to serve as a wedding ring, and Maka would not have wanted one anyway. Instead, they simply joined hands, their fingers interlacing, their grips firm and sure. Father O'Brien signed the marriage certificate. Harvey Mills added his witness signature with a shaking hand, and just like that, Ethan Reeves had a wife again. Kiona tugged on Ethan's sleeve. When he looked down, she pointed at him, then at Maka, then at herself, her small face questioning. Yes, Ethan said, kneeling so he was at her eye level. Your mother is my wife now, and that makes you my daughter. If you want to call me father, you can. Kiona considered this carefully. Then slowly she reached out and wrapped her arms around his neck, hugging him tightly. Father, she whispered in English. Ethan's arms came up, holding this small child who was not his by blood, but was now his by choice, and felt something break open inside his chest. All the grief he had carried for 4 years, all the guilt and pain and loneliness, cracked like ice in spring, and underneath it, he felt something he thought had died with Sarah. Hope. Father O'Brien left shortly after, taking Harvey Mills with him. But before Harvey mounted his horse, he pulled Ethan aside. Cole knows, Harvey said, his voice low and urgent. He knows about the Apache woman. He's gathering his men right now. They'll be here tomorrow night. Maybe 20 men, maybe more. Ethan's blood ran cold. How does he know? Harvey would not meet his eyes. I told him. I had to. He said he'd forgive my debt if I helped him. He said he'd pay for Martha's medicine. I'm sorry, Ethan. I'm so sorry, but I couldn't let my wife die. The betrayal hit Ethan like a physical blow, but when he looked at Harvey's face, at the anguish and shame written there, he could not find it in himself to hate the man. Desperation made people do terrible things. He knew that better than most. Get out of here, Ethan said quietly. Take your wife and go as far away as you can, because when Cole comes, he won't care about your debt or your help. He'll just see you as someone who knows too much. Harvey nodded, climbed onto his horse, and rode away without looking back. Ethan stood in the snow, watching him go, and felt the weight of what was coming settle onto his shoulders. 20 men or more, all armed, all paid to kill, coming here, coming for his wife, coming for his daughter. He had one day to prepare. When Ethan went back inside, Maka was standing by the window, and he could tell from the set of her shoulders that she had heard everything. He betrayed us, she said flatly. He's desperate. His wife is dying. Does that excuse him? No, Ethan said, but it explains him. Maka turned to face him, and her eyes held a hardness he had not seen before. What will we do? We cannot run. We cannot hide. There are too many of them. Ethan walked to his gun cabinet, pulling out his Winchester Model 1873, checking the action, counting his ammunition. 120 rounds. Against 20 men, that might be enough. Or it might not. We prepare, he said. We turn this cabin into a fortress. We make them pay for every inch of ground. And we hope that when the smoke clears, we're still standing. Maka nodded slowly. Then she walked to where Ethan kept her weapons, the knife and bow he had cleaned and oiled, while she recovered. She picked them up, testing the weight, the balance. I will fight beside you, she said. I will not hide while you face this alone. You're still healing, Ethan protested. I am Apache, Maka said, her voice firm. We fight wounded. We fight outnumbered. We fight when there is no hope, because sometimes fighting is all we have left. She crossed the room, standing close enough that he could feel the warmth of her body. You gave me your name today, she said softly. You gave Kiona a father. You gave us a home. Now let me give you something in return. Let me stand beside you and fight for what we've built. Ethan looked into her eyes and saw no fear there, only determination and a fierce pride that took his breath away. All right, Ma, he said. We fight together. They spent the rest of the day preparing. Ethan dug a trench around the cabin, 3 feet deep and 2 feet wide, then filled the bottom with sharpened stakes made from fence posts. He covered the stakes with a thin layer of branches and snow, making the trap nearly invisible. Maka helped despite her wounds, piling sandbags against the windows, creating firing positions, turning the cabin into a small fortress. She worked with efficient precision, and Ethan realized she had done this before, had prepared for battle many times in her life. They stacked bags of flour and grain against the walls for extra protection against bullets. They filled every container with water in case the cabin caught fire. They moved all of Ethan's ammunition into the main room where they could reach it easily. As the sun began to set, Ethan placed 6 barrels of kerosene around the exterior of the cabin, each one connected by a 50-foot fuse line that led back to the cabin door. If they needed to, they could create a wall of fire that would stop any frontal assault. Kiona watched all of this with wide, frightened eyes. She was only 6 years old, too young to understand the full scope of what was coming, but old enough to know that something terrible was about to happen. That night, after Kiona had finally cried herself to sleep, Ethan and Maka sat by the fire, cleaning weapons, checking ammunition, preparing for battle. The silence between them was heavy with unspoken words. Finally, Maka spoke. "If you die tomorrow," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "I want you to know something." Ethan looked at her, waiting. "This week with you has been the first time I have felt safe since my husband died. The first time I have felt like maybe there is still good in this world. The first time I have felt like maybe Kiona could have a real childhood instead of just survival." She turned to face him fully, the firelight casting shadows across her strong features. "You asked me earlier if I loved you. I did not answer honestly. The truth is, I do not know if what I feel is love. But I know that when I look at you, I feel something I thought had died with my husband. I feel hope, and that is worth fighting for." Ethan reached out, taking her hand in his. "On her deathbed, Sarah told me something," he said quietly. "She told me not to bury myself with her. She told me to find a reason to keep living. I promised her I would try, but until you and Kiona showed up, I never found that reason." He squeezed her hand gently. "Now I have. You are my reason, both of you, and I'm not going to let Cole or anyone else take that away." They sat in silence for a while longer, hands joined, drawing strength from each other. Then Maka spoke again, and this time there was something different in her voice, something softer. "In Apache culture," she said, "a marriage is not complete until the couple has shared their bodies, until they have become one flesh as well as one family." She looked at him, her eyes holding a question. "I know we married for legal reasons," she continued. "I know this was meant to be a partnership, not a romance. But we are married now. And if we die tomorrow, I do not want to die without knowing what it feels like to be your wife in all ways." Ethan's breath caught. He had not expected this, had not let himself hope for it. But as he looked at Maka, at this strong, brave woman who had chosen to stand beside him, he realized he wanted it too. Not just for the physical comfort, but for the connection, for the intimacy, for the feeling of not being alone. "Are you sure?" he asked. "I am sure," Maka said. They came together slowly, carefully, mindful of her healing wounds. There was no rush, no desperation, just two people seeking comfort and connection in the face of approaching violence. It was different from his nights with Sarah, who had been gentle and soft. Maka was all strength and fire, and when she pulled him close, he felt like he was holding lightning in his arms. Afterward, they lay together on the floor before the fire, wrapped in blankets, their bodies pressed close. Maka's head rested on Ethan's chest, her hand over his heart, feeling the steady beat. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For making me feel human again. For making me feel like I am more than just a warrior, more than just a mother running for her life. For making me feel like a woman again." Ethan kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of smoke and leather that clung to her hair. "Thank you for giving me a reason to live again," he said. They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, finding peace in the eye of the coming storm. Dawn came too soon, cold and gray and full of menace. Ethan woke to find Maka already up, checking weapons, preparing for battle. She had tied her hair back, braided it tight to keep it out of her face during the fighting. She wore her buckskin dress, but over it she had put on one of Ethan's heavy wool shirts for extra protection against the cold. Kiona was still asleep, curled up near the fire, her small face peaceful. Ethan looked at her and felt his resolve harden. Whatever happened today, whatever the cost, he would keep this child safe. The sun climbed higher, painting the snow gold and pink. Ethan stood on his porch, rifle in hand, scanning the tree line for any sign of movement. The world was silent except for the wind, but it was the silence before a storm, heavy with promise of violence. Around noon, Harvey Mills came riding hard, his horse lathered with sweat despite the cold. He reined up 50 yards from the cabin, not daring to come closer. "Ethan," he called. "They're coming. Cole has 20 men. They'll be here within the hour." Then Harvey turned his horse and rode away, fulfilling his last obligation, delivering his last warning. Ethan went back inside. Maka was holding Kiona, speaking to her softly in Apache. When she saw Ethan, she switched to English. "I am telling her that no matter what happens, she must stay hidden in the root cellar beneath the cabin, that she must not come out until either you or I come for her." Kiona was crying, clutching her mother's dress. "I don't want to hide," she said in broken English. "I want to stay with you and Father." "You must be brave," Maka said firmly. "Your father and I need to know you are safe so we can fight without fear. Can you be brave for us?" Kiona nodded, tears streaming down her face, trying so hard to be strong. Ethan knelt beside her, taking her small hands in his large ones. "Kiona," he said gently, "I promise you, I will not let anyone hurt your mother. And I promise that when this is over, we will all be together again. But right now, I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" Kiona threw her arms around his neck, holding him tight. "I love you, Father," she whispered. Those 4 words nearly broke him. This child, who he had known for only a week, who was not his by blood, loved him. And he realized with sudden clarity that he loved her too, loved her as much as he would have loved the child Sarah had carried. "I love you too," he said, his voice thick. "Now go with your mother. Be brave, be strong, and wait for us." Maka carried Kiona down into the root cellar, a small space beneath the cabin floor where Ethan stored vegetables and preserved food through the winter. She settled her daughter in the darkest corner, wrapped in blankets, and placed a water skin and some dried meat beside her. "Remember," Maka said, "do not come out for anyone except Father or me. No matter what you hear, no matter how scared you are, promise me." "I promise," Kiona whispered. Maka kissed her daughter's forehead, then climbed back up into the cabin, closing the trap door and covering it with a rug. When she stood, Ethan saw that her face was set in hard lines, all softness gone. This was the warrior woman now, ready for battle. They took their positions at the windows, weapons ready, and waited. They did not have to wait long. Just as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, they came. 20 riders appearing from the tree line like ghosts materializing from smoke. They spread out in a loose semicircle around the cabin, staying just out of rifle range, a show of force meant to intimidate. Marcus Cole rode at the center of the line, sitting tall in his saddle, a man who commanded through fear and violence. He was big, 6'2" at least, with broad shoulders and arms thick with muscle. His beard was black and well-trimmed, his eyes cold as winter ice. He wore a cavalry officer's coat despite having been discharged years ago, as if the trappings of legitimate authority could mask the fact that he was nothing more than a paid killer. Cole raised his hand and his men stopped. Then he spurred his horse forward alone, riding to within shouting distance of the cabin. "Ethan Reeves," Cole's voice carried across the snow, loud and confident. "I know you have the Apache woman and her brat inside that cabin. Send them out and I'll let you live. I'll even pay you $500 in gold for your trouble. You can keep your land, keep your life, and walk away from this with money in your pocket." Ethan stepped out onto his porch, his Winchester held loosely in his hands. "This land is mine under the Homestead Act," he calls back. "The woman inside is my legal wife, married yesterday by Father O'Brien. The child is my adopted daughter. They have as much right to be here as I do." A ripple of surprise went through Cole's men. They had not expected this. Cole's face darkened with anger. "You married a savage?" he spat. "You married an Apache?" "I married a woman," Ethan said calmly. "A woman I chose to stand beside, and I'm not giving her up." Cole leaned forward in his saddle, his voice dropping to a menacing growl that somehow still carried across the distance. "Then you're a fool, Reeves, a dead fool. I have 20 men. You have 1 rifle and 1 Apache squaw. You cannot win this fight." Maybe not, Ethan said, but I can make you pay for every inch. I can make sure that when this is over, you'll be burying half your men. Is that worth $5,000 to you? Because that's how much the railway company is paying you for this job, isn't it? $5,000 to clear Apache from this territory. How much of that will you spend on funerals? Cole's jaw tightened. Ethan had guessed right. The railway company was paying Cole a lump sum to handle the Apache problem, and every man Cole lost ate into his profit. Last chance, Reeves, Cole said. Send them out or we come in and take them. Ethan raised his rifle, pointing it directly at Cole's chest. Come ahead, he said quietly. See what happens. For a long moment, Cole stared at him, measuring, calculating. Then he smiled, a cold, cruel smile that held no warmth. As you wish. He wheeled his horse around and rode back to his men. Ethan could see him giving orders, pointing, dividing his force. Then Cole raised his hand high and dropped it sharply. The attack began. The days after Sheriff Morgan's warning passed in a tense rhythm of healing and preparation. Inside the cabin, wounds mended slowly. Maka's shoulder knitted itself back together under Ethan's careful tending, the stitches holding, despite her insistence on moving too soon. Kiona's leg lost its angry redness, the gash closing into a pink line that would someday fade to a pale scar. But the real changes were harder to see. They lived in the silences between words, in the way Maka's eyes followed Ethan as he moved through his daily routines, in how Kiona no longer flinched when he came near. On the third morning, Ethan was teaching Kiona to count using dried beans from his winter stores. He placed 5 beans on the rough wooden table, and she pointed at each one with her small finger. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Her pronunciation was careful, deliberate, her tongue working around these strange English sounds. When she finished without error, she looked up at him with such pure pride that something twisted in Ethan's chest. Good, he said, his voice rougher than he intended. Very good, Kiona. From the bed where she rested, Maka watched them. When Ethan met her eyes, he saw something there he could not quite name. Not suspicion anymore. Something softer. Something that made his pulse quicken. You are good with children, Maka said quietly. You would have been a good father. The words struck like a physical blow. Ethan turned away, busying himself with returning the beans to their jar, his hands shaking slightly. Sarah and I were going to name our child Hope if it was a girl, he said, his back still turned. We argued about it for months. She wanted Hope. I wanted Grace. He paused, staring at the jar in his hands. We never got to name our child at all. Sarah died with the baby still inside her. The doctor said if I had been faster, if I had reached him sooner, he might have saved them both. But I was too slow, too late, always too late. Silence filled the cabin. Then Maka spoke, and her voice carried its own weight of grief. My husband died 3 years ago. Cholera. He was strong, a warrior, the best hunter in our band. But sickness does not care about strength. He died in 2 days, burning with fever, wasting to nothing. She looked down at Kiona, who had gone still, listening. I raised Kiona alone after that, taught her to track, to find water, to read the signs the land gives us. I taught her to be strong like her father. But I could not teach her to be safe, because for our people, there is no safety. Not anymore, but. Ethan turned back to face her. In the morning light streaming through the window, he saw her clearly. Not just a wounded Apache woman he was obligated to help, but a person, a mother, a widow, someone who understood what it meant to lose everything and keep breathing anyway. Tell me what happened, he said. Everything about the attack. Maka was quiet for a long moment, her eyes distant. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady, but Ethan heard the pain underneath like bedrock under soil. 2 weeks ago, our band was camped in the Little Bighorn Valley. 52 people. We were not raiders. We did not attack settlers. We just wanted to live on the land our ancestors gave us. She paused, her jaw tightening. The railroad company wanted that land, the Northern Pacific Railway. They offered money, but our elders refused. You do not sell the bones of your ancestors. So the company sent Marcus Cole and 15 hired guns to solve the problem another way. Kiona had moved to stand beside her mother, one small hand gripping Maka's arm as the story unfolded. They came at night when the moon was dark. They set fire to our lodges and shot anyone who ran. Children, elders, it did not matter. Cole was being paid $100 for each Apache he killed. We were just numbers on a contract to him. Her voice went flat, emotionless, the way people sound when describing horror too great for feeling. I heard the first shots and knew what was happening. I grabbed Kiona and ran to a cave we used for storage. I hit her in the back, covered the entrance with branches, made her promise to stay silent no matter what. She looked at her daughter and Ethan saw tears gathering in her eyes. Then I ran the other way. I made noise. I left tracks. I wanted them to chase me, to forget about looking for survivors. 4 men followed me into the forest. Pride crept into her voice, cold and hard as winter iron. I killed the first with an arrow through his throat. The second I killed with my knife when he came too close. The third and fourth I fought together. I killed one, wounded the other, but he shot me before he ran. She touched her side where the bullet wound was healing. I hid in the forest for 2 days. No food, no water, just bleeding and trying not to die. When I finally went back, everyone was dead. The lodges were burned, and Kiona was gone. Her voice broke on that last word. I found her tracks leading away from the camp. She had heard the shooting stop and thought it was safe. She went looking for me. I tracked her for 2 more days, watching her footprints get more erratic, more desperate. I knew she was dying. Maka looked at Ethan, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. And then her tracks led here, to your cabin. I thought I was too late. I thought you were another white man who would kill Apache on sight. I came here ready to die trying to save my daughter. But I saved her instead, Ethan said quietly. Yes, you saved us both, and I still do not understand why. Ethan was quiet, thinking about Sarah's grave under the oak tree, about the promise he had made, about 4 years of empty nights and hollow days. Because 4 years ago, I could not save my family. Maybe this was my chance to save someone else's. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Then Kiona tugged on Ethan's sleeve, pointed at him, then at Maka, then made a gesture encompassing the whole cabin. Home? She asked in careful English. Ethan looked at Maka. Maka looked back, and in that shared glance, something unspoken passed between them, a question asked and answered without words. Yes, Ethan said, home. On the 5th day, the fragile peace was shattered by a knock on the door. Ethan opened it to find Harvey Mills standing on his porch, thin as a rail, holding a cloth-covered basket. Morning, Ethan, Harvey said, his voice nervous as a cornered animal. Brought you some smoked meat and bread. Thought you might need supplies after the storm. Ethan did not move from the doorway, his body blocking any view inside. That is kind of you, Harvey. Harvey shifted his weight, his eyes trying to see past Ethan into the cabin. Heard Sheriff Morgan was out here asking about Apache. The sheriff asks about many things, Ethan said evenly. Harvey lowered his voice, glancing around as if trees had ears. Thing is, if you are hiding Apache on your property, I want to help. My wife Martha has consumption, same as your Sarah did. Doctor says she needs $300 for medicine or she will be dead by summer. I do not have that money. I owe Cole $200 from a loan. If I do not pay, he takes my land. His eyes were desperate, pleading. If you pay me something, anything, I can help you. I can be a lookout. I can bring supplies. I am drowning here, Ethan. Every instinct screamed danger, but Ethan kept his face neutral. I do not have any Apache here, Harvey, and I do not have money to give you, but I appreciate the thought. Harvey's face fell. He nodded slowly, turned to leave, then stopped. Cole is gathering men, 20 of them. He is planning to search every homestead within 30 miles. He will be here in 3 days, Ethan. 3 days, and he will not ask permission to search. The warning delivered, Harvey climbed on his horse and rode away. Ethan closed the door and found Maka standing behind him, her face pale. We must leave. Now, before he comes back. No, Ethan said firmly. You are too weak. Kiona's leg is not healed. You would not make it 10 miles. Then what do we do? Maka's voice was sharp with fear. Wait for Cole to kill us? Ethan walked to his bed, knelt down, pulled out a wooden box hidden beneath. Inside were papers, legal documents he had saved for years. There is another way, a legal way. He pulled out a document, scanned it, then looked at Maka. The Homestead Act gives me rights to this land, and coverture law says a married woman falls under her husband's legal protection. If you were my wife, legally married, you would have the right to be here. Cole could not force you to leave without going through me first. Maka stared at him, not understanding at first. Then comprehension dawned. You want to marry me for legal protection. Not just legal protection, Ethan said, surprising himself with the honesty. I want you and Kiona to stay. I want you safe. This is the best way. Maka was silent for a long time. Do you love me? Ethan considered lying, then decided she deserved truth. I do not know what love is anymore. Sarah died and I buried my heart with her. But I know I want you here. I know when I think about you leaving, something in my chest hurts in a way it has not since Sarah died. Maybe that is not love, but maybe it is enough. Maka stepped closer. In my tribe, marriage is not about love at first. It is about partnership, about choosing someone to stand beside through all things, about building something together that neither could build alone. She held out her hand. You have chosen to stand beside me when any other man would have turned away. You have risked everything to protect my daughter. I will marry you, Ethan Reeves, not because I must, but because I choose to. Ethan took her hand, feeling the calluses on her palm, the strength in her grip. It was nothing like Sarah's soft hands. This was the hand of a woman who had fought for her life and won. Then we do it right. We make it legal so no one can question it. That afternoon, Ethan rode to Red Creek, to the small church where Father Daniel O'Brien served a congregation of ranchers and miners trying to carve civilization from wilderness. Father O'Brien was 58, white-haired, with kind eyes that had seen too much suffering. He listened to Ethan's request without interruption. You want to marry an Apache woman, he said when Ethan finished. Yes. To protect her from Marcus Cole. Yes. Does she know this is primarily a legal arrangement? She knows. We both do. We are going into this with open eyes. Father O'Brien was quiet, then sighed. I have known Marcus Cole for 5 years. He is a man who has forgotten what it means to be human. If you marry this woman, you make yourself his enemy. You understand that? I understand. You could lose everything. Your land, your life. I know. Father O'Brien studied Ethan's face, looking for doubt. He found none. Then I will marry you, because sometimes the law is wrong, and the only way to fight it is with right action. When do you want the ceremony? Tomorrow, before Cole comes. The next morning dawned clear and cold, the kind of morning where sunlight turns snow to diamonds and the air hurt to breathe. Father O'Brien arrived at Ethan's cabin just after sunrise, riding a gray mare and carrying a worn Bible. Inside, Maka wore her clean buckskin dress, tears mended with careful stitches. She had braided her long black hair and stood straight despite healing wounds, every inch the warrior woman she was. Kiona stood beside her mother, one small hand gripping Maka's dress, eyes wide and solemn. There were no flowers, no white dress, no guests except Harvey Mills, who had agreed to serve as witness despite obvious nervousness. The cabin smelled of wood smoke and coffee, morning light streaming through the window painting everything gold. Father O'Brien opened his Bible, but before beginning, he looked at both Ethan and Maka. Marriage is not just a legal contract. It is a covenant, a promise made before God that you will stand together through all things. It is not something to enter lightly, even when reasons seem purely practical. He paused. So I ask you both now, are you doing this only for legal protection? Or is there more? Ethan looked at Maka. Maka looked back. And in that shared glance, Ethan realized something he had been too afraid to admit. Somewhere in the past week, between binding wounds and teaching her daughter to count, between shared stories of loss and quiet moments by the fire, something had changed. He cared about this woman, not from obligation, but because she was strong and brave and fierce, because she loved her daughter with devotion that reminded him of Sarah, because when she looked at him, he felt like maybe he was worth something after all. There is more to it than legal protection, Ethan said steadily. I want her to stay, not just until Cole gives up. Forever. I want to build something with her. With Kiona. I want to be a family. Maka's breath caught. I want that too. I want a home where my daughter can grow up safe, where she can learn to read and count and be something more than a hunted animal. And I want it with you. Father O'Brien smiled. Then let us begin. The ceremony was simple, no long speeches, just essential words binding two lives together. Ethan Reeves, do you take Maka to be your wife, to protect her in all circumstances, to honor her, to stand beside her through whatever comes? I do. Maka, do you take Ethan Reeves to be your husband, to support him in all challenges, to share his burdens, to stand beside him through whatever comes? I do. Before God and these witnesses, I declare you husband and wife. There was no ring. Instead, they simply joined hands, fingers interlacing, grips firm and sure. Father O'Brien signed the marriage certificate. Harvey Mills added his witness signature with a shaking hand, and just like that, Ethan Reeves had a wife again. Kiona tugged on Ethan's sleeve. When he looked down, she pointed at him, then at Maka, then at herself, her small face questioning. Yes, Ethan said, kneeling to her eye level. Your mother is my wife now. That makes you my daughter. If you want to call me father, you can. Kiona considered this carefully. Then slowly she reached out and wrapped her arms around his neck. Father, she whispered in English. Ethan's arms came up, holding this small child who was not his by blood, but was now his by choice, and felt something break open inside his chest. All the grief he had carried for 4 years cracked like ice in spring, and underneath it he felt something he thought had died with Sarah. Hope. Father O'Brien left shortly after, taking Harvey with him. But before Harvey mounted his horse, he pulled Ethan aside. Cole knows, Harvey said, voice low and urgent. He knows about the Apache woman. He is gathering his men right now. They will be here tomorrow night. Maybe 20 men. Ethan's blood ran cold. How does he know? Harvey would not meet his eyes. I told him. I had to. He said he would forgive my debt if I helped. He said he would pay for Martha's medicine. I am sorry, Ethan. I am so sorry. But I could not let my wife die. The betrayal hit like a physical blow. But looking at Harvey's face, at the anguish and shame written there, Ethan could not find it in himself to hate the man. Desperation made people do terrible things. Get out of here, Ethan said quietly. Take your wife and go far away, because when Cole comes, he will not care about your debt or your help. He will just see you as someone who knows too much. Harvey nodded and rode away without looking back. Ethan stood in the snow watching him go, feeling the weight of what was coming settle on his shoulders. 20 armed men coming here, coming for his wife, coming for his daughter. He had 1 day to prepare. When Ethan went back inside, Maka was standing by the window. He could tell from her shoulders that she had heard everything. He betrayed us, she said flatly. He is desperate. His wife is dying. Does that excuse him? No, but it explains him. Maka turned to face him, her eyes hard. What will we do? We cannot run. We cannot hide. There are too many. Ethan walked to his gun cabinet, pulling out his Winchester Model 1873, checking the action, counting ammunition. 120 rounds. Against 20 men, that might be enough. Or it might not. We prepare. We turn this cabin into a fortress. We make them pay for every inch. And we hope that when the smoke clears, we are still standing. Maka nodded slowly. Then she walked to where Ethan kept her weapons, picking up the knife and bow he had cleaned and oiled. I will fight beside you. I will not hide while you face this alone. You are still healing. I am Apache, Maka said firmly. We fight wounded. We fight outnumbered. We fight when there is no hope, because sometimes fighting is all we have left. She crossed the room, standing close enough that he could feel her warmth. You gave me your name today. You gave Kiona a father. You gave us a home. Now let me give you something in return. Let me stand beside you and fight for what we built. Ethan looked into her eyes and saw no fear there, only determination and fierce pride that took his breath away. All right, we fight together. They spent the rest of the day preparing. Ethan dug a trench around the cabin, 3 feet deep and 2 feet wide, then filled the bottom with sharpened stakes from fence posts. He covered the stakes with branches and snow, making the trap nearly invisible. Maka helped despite her wounds, piling sandbags against windows, creating firing positions, turning the cabin into a small fortress. She worked with efficient precision, and Ethan realized she had done this before, had prepared for battle many times. They stacked bags of flour and grain against walls for extra protection. They filled every container with water in case of fire. They moved all ammunition into the main room where they could reach it easily. As the sun began to set, Ethan placed 6 barrels of kerosene around the cabin's exterior, each connected by a 50-foot fuse line leading back to the door. If needed, they could create a wall of fire to stop any frontal assault. Kiona watched all this with wide-eyed, frightened eyes. She was only 6, too young to understand fully, but old enough to know something terrible was coming. That night, after Kiona finally cried herself to sleep, Ethan and Maka sat by the fire, cleaning weapons, checking ammunition, preparing for battle. The silence between them was heavy with unspoken words. Finally, Maka spoke. "If you die tomorrow, I want you to know something." Ethan looked at her, waiting. "This week with you has been the first time I have felt safe since my husband died. The first time I have felt like maybe there is still good in this world. The first time I have felt like maybe Kiona could have a real childhood instead of just survival." She turned to face him fully, firelight casting shadows across her strong features. "You asked earlier if I loved you. I did not answer honestly. The truth is, I do not know if what I feel is love. But when I look at you, I feel something I thought had died with my husband. I feel hope, and that is worth fighting for." Ethan reached out, taking her hand. "4 years ago, Sarah told me something on her deathbed. She told me not to bury myself with her. She told me to find a reason to keep living. I promised I would try, but until you and Kiona showed up, I never found that reason." He squeezed her hand gently. "Now I have. You are my reason, both of you, and I am not going to let Cole or anyone else take that away." They sat in silence for a while longer, hands joined, drawing strength from each other. Then Maka spoke again, something different in her voice, something softer. "In Apache culture, a marriage is not complete until the couple has shared their bodies, until they have become one flesh as well as one family." She looked at him, eyes holding a question. "I know we married for legal reasons, but we are married now. And if we die tomorrow, I do not want to die without knowing what it feels like to be your wife in all ways." Ethan's breath caught. "Are you sure?" "I am sure." They came together slowly, carefully, mindful of healing wounds. There was no rush, no desperation, just 2 people seeking comfort and connection in the face of approaching violence. It was different from his nights with Sarah, who had been gentle and soft. Maka was all strength and fire, and when she pulled him close, he felt like he was holding lightning in his arms. Afterward, they laid together on the floor before the fire, wrapped in blankets, bodies pressed close. Maka's head rested on Ethan's chest, her hand over his heart, feeling the steady beat. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For making me feel human again. For making me feel like I am more than just a warrior, more than just a mother running for her life. For making me feel like a woman again." Ethan kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of smoke and leather that clung to her hair. "Thank you for giving me a reason to live again." They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, finding peace in the eye of the coming storm. Dawn came too soon, cold and gray and full of menace. Ethan woke to find Maka already up, checking weapons, preparing for battle. She had tied her hair back, braided tight to keep it out of her face. She wore her buckskin dress with one of Ethan's heavy wool shirts over it for protection against the cold. Kiona was still asleep, curled near the fire, her small face peaceful. Ethan looked at her and felt his resolve harden. Whatever happened today, whatever the cost, he would keep this child safe. The sun climbed higher, painting the snow gold and pink. Ethan stood on his porch, rifle in hand, scanning the tree line. The world was silent except for wind, but it was the silence before a storm, heavy with promise of violence. Around noon, Harvey Mills came riding hard. His horse lathered despite the cold. He reined up 50 yards from the cabin. "Ethan, they are coming. Cole has 20 men. They will be here within the hour." Then Harvey turned his horse and rode away, fulfilling his last obligation. Ethan went back inside. Maka was holding Kiona, speaking to her softly in Apache. When she saw Ethan, she switched to English. I am telling her that no matter what happens, she must stay hidden in the root cellar. She must not come out until you or I come for her. Kiona was crying, clutching her mother's dress. I do not want to hide. I want to stay with you and father. You must be brave, Maka said firmly. Your father and I need to know you are safe so we can fight without fear. Can you be brave for us? Kiona nodded, tears streaming, trying so hard to be strong. Ethan knelt beside her, taking her small hands. Kiona, I promise you I will not let anyone hurt your mother. And I promise that when this is over, we will all be together again. But right now, I need you to trust me. Can you do that? Kiona threw her arms around his neck. I love you, father, she whispered. Those 4 words nearly broke him. I love you too. Now go with your mother. Be brave, be strong, and wait for us. Maka carried Kiona down into the root cellar beneath the cabin floor, settled her in the darkest corner, wrapped in blankets, placed water and dried meat beside her. Remember, do not come out for anyone except father or me, no matter what you hear. Promise me. I promise, Kiona whispered. Maka kissed her daughter's forehead, climbed back up, closed the trapdoor, and covered it with a rug. When she stood, her face was set in hard lines. This was the warrior woman now, ready for battle. They took positions at the windows, weapons ready, and waited. They did not have to wait long. Just as the sun began its descent, they came, 20 riders appearing from the tree line like ghosts from smoke. They spread out in a loose semicircle, staying just out of rifle range, a show of force meant to intimidate. Marcus Cole rode at the center, tall in his saddle. He was big, 6'2" at least, broad-shouldered, arms thick with muscle. His black beard was well-trimmed, his eyes cold as winter ice. He wore a cavalry officer's coat despite having been discharged years ago. Cole raised his hand, and his men stopped. Then he spurred his horse forward alone, riding to within shouting distance. Ethan Reeves, I know you have the Apache woman and her brat inside. Send them out, and I will let you live. I will even pay you $500. You can keep your land, keep your life, walk away with money in your pocket. Ethan stepped onto his porch, Winchester held loosely. This land is mine under the Homestead Act. The woman inside is my legal wife. Married yesterday by Father O'Brien. The child is my adopted daughter. They have as much right to be here as I do. Surprise rippled through Cole's men. Cole's face darkened. You married a savage? You married an Apache? I married a woman I chose to stand beside, and I am not giving her up. Cole leaned forward, his voice dropping to a menacing growl that still carried. Then you are a fool, Reeves. A dead fool. I have 20 men. You have 1 rifle and 1 squaw. You cannot win. Maybe not, but I can make you pay for every inch. I can make sure when this is over you will be burying half your men. Is that worth $5,000 to you? Cole's jaw tightened. Ethan had guessed right about the payment. Last chance, Reeves. Send them out or we come in and take them. Ethan raised his rifle, pointing it directly at Cole's chest. Come ahead, see what happens. Cole stared at him, measuring, calculating. Then he smiled, cold and cruel. As you wish. He wheeled his horse around and rode back to his men. Ethan could see him giving orders, pointing, dividing his force. Then Cole raised his hand high and dropped it sharply. The attack began. The first wave came from the south. 6 riders charging at full gallop, rifles raised, firing as they came. The gunshots shattered the frozen silence like breaking glass. Bullets thudded into the log walls, splintered wood, sent chips of ice flying from the eaves. Ethan dropped to one knee behind the window, sighted down his Winchester, and fired. The rifle kicked against his shoulder. The lead rider jerked backward, tumbled from his saddle, hit the snow, and did not move. His horse ran on, wild-eyed and riderless. Beside him, Maka fired her Colt revolver, the 6-shooter bucking in her steady hand. Her first shot went wide, but her second caught a rider in the shoulder, spinning him half around. He kept coming, teeth gritted against the pain, and Ethan had to fire again, this time hitting him center mass. 2 down, 18 to go. The remaining 4 riders reached the hidden trench. The first horse tried to jump it. The trench was too wide. The animal's front hooves caught the far edge, and it crashed down into the sharpened stakes below. The rider was thrown clear, landing hard, stunned. The other three pulled up short, horses rearing and snorting, refusing to cross. That hesitation was all Ethan needed. He fired 3 times in rapid succession, working the Winchester's lever with practiced speed. 2 riders fell. The third wheeled his horse and galloped back toward the tree line, choosing survival over gold. Maka shot the stunned rider before he could rise. He went down clutching his leg, screaming. 5 down in the first 2 minutes. But this was just the beginning. Cole was testing their defenses, sacrificing pawns to learn the game. The second wave came from the north, 6 men on foot this time, dismounted and advancing from tree to tree, using cover, firing as they moved. These were not amateurs. These were men who knew how to assault a fortified position. Ethan shifted to the north window, tracking movement through the pines. He saw a muzzle flash and fired at it, heard a cry of pain but could not confirm the kill. Maka fired an arrow through a different window, the bow silent compared to the crack of gunfire. A gurgling scream told Ethan her arrow had found its mark. The attackers reached the clearing's edge, close enough now that Ethan could see their faces. Hard men, desperate men, men who had done this before. One lobbed something toward the cabin, a bottle with a burning rag, a Molotov cocktail. It struck the roof and shattered, spreading burning kerosene across the wooden shingles. "The roof!" Ethan shouted. Maka was already moving, climbing to the loft where Ethan stored hay and grain. She grabbed a bucket of sand and threw it out through the loft window onto the burning section. The flames sputtered but did not die completely. 2 more attackers tried to jump the trench. One made it, landing hard but staying on his feet. He raised his rifle toward the cabin. Ethan shot him through the throat before he could fire. The man fell backward into the trench onto the stakes. The second jumper slipped on the icy edge and tumbled down into the stakes with a scream that cut off abruptly. The remaining 3 retreated, laying down covering fire. Ethan counted in his head. 20 rounds fired. 100 left. 9 men down. 11 remaining plus Cole. There was a lull. Ethan reloaded, his hands working automatically. Through the window he could see Cole gathering his remaining men, pointing, gesturing, giving new orders. "They will try something different now," Maka said, descending from the loft. "They have lost too many to keep attacking the same way." She was right. 3 men were sneaking around the west side, using the sheep pen for cover, trying to reach the cabin from what they thought was a blind spot. But Ethan had prepared for this. He struck a match, touched it to the fuse line. 5 seconds later, the kerosene barrel exploded in a ball of fire and black smoke. 2 men were caught in the blast, went down screaming. The third ran back toward the trees, his coat on fire, and collapsed halfway there. The explosion panicked the remaining sheep. They broke through the damaged fence, running in all directions, creating chaos that made it harder for Cole's men to see clear targets. Cole himself emerged from the tree line, rifle in hand, his face twisted with rage. He had lost 12 men, more than half his force, and had not even breached the cabin. He fired 3 shots at the cabin in frustration, then shouted orders. "Burn them out, everything. The barn, the coop, everything." 4 men ran forward with torches, 2 headed for the barn, 2 for the chicken coop. Ethan shot one heading for the barn, but the other reached it and threw his torch onto the hay. The dry hay caught immediately, flames racing up the barn side. Maka took down one man heading for the coop with an arrow through the back, but his partner completed the task, setting the small structure ablaze. Now smoke was everywhere, thick, black, rolling across the snow. Ethan could hear Keona crying in the root cellar below, calling for her mother in Apache. Terrified. "Stay down there," Maka shouted toward the floor. "Do not come out." Cole's remaining men used the smoke for cover, advancing from multiple directions. A man burst through the smoke right in front of the door, rifle raised. Ethan fired from the hip. The bullet caught him in the stomach, doubling him over. Another came from the side. Maka's knife flashed, buried itself in his throat. They were inside the defensive perimeter now. Ethan grabbed the last 2 fuse lines and lit them both. The barrels exploded, creating walls of fire that separated Cole's remaining men. Through flames and smoke, Ethan saw Cole himself running toward the cabin, face a mask of fury. This was no longer about money. This was personal. Cole crashed through the door, shoulder taking it off its hinges, rifle swinging toward Ethan. Ethan dove aside. Cole's bullet whistled past where his head had been. He rolled, came up with his Winchester, but Cole batted it aside with inhuman strength, hands going for Ethan's throat. They crashed to the floor, Cole's weight pressing down, thumbs digging into Ethan's windpipe. Ethan's vision darkened, spots dancing. He clawed at Cole's hands. The grip was iron, unbreakable. Then Maka was there, knife raised, driving it toward Cole's back. Cole sensed the movement, twisted, caught her wrist with one hand. He threw her across the room. She hit the wall hard, slid down, stunned. Cole turned back to Ethan, both hands returning to his throat. Ethan's lungs burned, his heart hammered, seconds from losing consciousness. His hands scrabbled across the floor, found the axe handle, the axe he had been using to split wood. With the last of his strength, Ethan swung it upward, catching Cole in the temple with the blunt end. Cole's grip loosened, eyes unfocused. Ethan hit him again, harder. Cole toppled sideways, blood streaming from his scalp. Ethan rolled away, gasping, throat on fire. He found his rifle, brought it up as Cole struggled to his knees, shaking his head. "Stay down," Ethan croaked. "Stay down or I'll kill you." Cole looked at him. For just a moment, Ethan saw fear in those cold eyes. Real fear. Then Cole's hand moved toward his belt pistol. Ethan fired. The bullet took Cole high in the chest, just below the collarbone, spinning him around. Cole fell, blood spreading across his cavalry coat, breathing in wet, rattling gasps. But before Ethan could move, shouts came from outside. Not attack shouts, but something else. Confusion. Panic. Maka stumbled to the window. "They are running," she said, disbelief in her voice. "The rest, they are running away." Ethan joined her, saw it was true. The remaining 5 or 6 men were mounting horses, galloping toward the tree line, choosing life over loyalty to a dying leader. It was over. The battle had lasted perhaps 30 minutes. 13 of Cole's men were dead. The rest had fled. The barn smoldered. Parts of the roof still burned. But the cabin had held. Ethan dropped his rifle, went to Cole, knelt beside the dying man. Cole's eyes were open, staring at nothing, breath coming in short, painful gasps. You can't." Cole tried to speak, blood bubbling on his lips. "You're just one man." "I was never just one man," Ethan said quietly. "I had something worth fighting for. You were fighting for money. That's the difference." Cole's eyes flickered. Something like understanding passed across his face. Then he coughed, blood spraying, and went still. Ethan stood, swaying. That was when he felt the warm wetness on his side, looked down, saw blood soaking his shirt. At some point, he did not remember when, a bullet had grazed his ribs. Not deep, but bleeding steadily. "Ethan!" Maka was at his side, hands pressing against the wound. "You are hurt!" "It's not bad," Ethan said, though the world was tilting sideways. "Just a graze." He had not had worse, but the blood loss combined with the adrenaline crash and the bruising on his throat was too much. His knees buckled. Maka caught him before he fell. "Kiona," she called. "Kiona, it is safe. Come out." The trapdoor flew open. Kiona scrambled up, face streaked with tears, eyes wild. She saw Ethan bleeding in her mother's arms and let out a cry of pure anguish. "Father, Father, do not die. Please do not die." "I'm not dying," Ethan tried to say, but his voice would not work. The world was going gray, sounds becoming distant. The last thing he saw before darkness took him was Kiona's small face, tears streaming, and Maka's hands pressing against his wound, trying to keep his life from leaking away. He woke to sunlight, warm sunlight streaming through a window. For a moment he could not remember where he was, what had happened. Then memory returned in a rush. The battle, Cole, the fire. He tried to sit up, pain lanced through his side, forcing a groan. "Easy." Maka was there immediately, hands gentle on his shoulders, easing him back. "You have been unconscious for 2 days. Your wound is not deep, but you lost much blood. You need to rest." "Kiona?" Ethan asked, voice a rasp. She is fine. She is outside with Father O'Brien. He came when he saw the smoke. He brought medicine, food, help. As if summoned, Father O'Brien appeared in the doorway, weathered face creased with concern. You gave us quite a scare, Ethan Reeves, the priest said. When I rode up and saw the bodies the barn burned down, I thought for certain you were dead. How many? Ethan asked. How many did we kill? 13 bodies here, Cole among them. 3 more died from wounds before reaching Red Creek. Sheriff Morgan has been arrested by U.S. Marshal. Seems someone sent a telegram to Fort Ellis reporting that Morgan was taking bribes, looking the other way, while Cole murdered Apache. Father O'Brien smiled slightly. That someone might have been me. After your wedding, I realized what was coming. I sent word to the authorities. The marshal arrived yesterday with 20 soldiers. They are still cleaning up, burying the dead. He leaned forward. Cole kept records, Ethan. Detailed records of everyone he killed, every payment the Northern Pacific Railway made. 52 Apache murdered, including children. The railway company is facing federal charges. They will pay for what they did, in money and reputation. Ethan closed his eyes, relief washing over him. Justice. Actual justice. What about us? He asked. Maka and Kiona? The marshal reviewed your marriage certificate. He spoke with me about the circumstances. Legally, Maka is your wife and Kiona is your daughter. They have every right to be here. No one can take them away. Father O'Brien stood to leave, paused at the door. You did something extraordinary here, Ethan. You stood against impossible odds and won. You protected your family. That is what real courage looks like. After the priest left, Maka sat beside Ethan on the bed, her hand finding his. He is right, she said softly. You saved us, not just from Cole, but from a life of running, of always looking over our shoulders. You gave us a home. We gave each other a home, Ethan corrected. You fought beside me. You kept me alive. This is our victory. Maka was quiet, then placed her hand over her stomach, a gesture that made Ethan's heart skip. I have something to tell you, she said. I have been sick in the mornings for the past week. At first I thought it was stress, but I know my body. I have been through this before. She met his eyes. I am your child, Ethan. Your child. Our child. The words hit like a physical force. A child. His child. The family he thought lost forever returned in a form he never imagined. Are you sure? He whispered. I am sure. Perhaps 6 weeks. It happened the night before the battle when we became husband and wife in truth, Ethan finished. Yes. Ethan's eyes filled with tears. 4 years of grief, guilt, emptiness, all released in that moment. He pulled Maka close, held her while he wept. Thank you, he said when he could speak. Thank you for giving me back my life, for giving me hope. Maka pulled back to look at him. You gave me the same things, she said. We saved each other. That is what makes this right. The door burst open. Kiona ran in, face lighting up when she saw Ethan awake. Father, you are alive! Mother said you would wake, but I was so scared. She climbed carefully onto the bed, nestled between him and Maka. Ethan put one arm around her, the other around Maka, and felt something he had not felt in 4 years. Complete. The weeks that followed were hard, but good. The barn had to be rebuilt, the cabin repaired, the fence line restored. But Ethan did not work alone. Harvey Mills returned, his wife Martha miraculously improving after Father O'Brien arranged for proper medicine. Harvey worked alongside Ethan without pay, atoning for his betrayal. Other neighbors came too, people Ethan barely knew, drawn by the story of the homesteader who stood against Marcus Cole. They brought lumber, nails, food, labor. Within a month, the barn was rebuilt, better than before. Spring came early that year. Snow melted in rushing streams, ground thawed, wildflowers pushed through mud. Ethan and Maka planted crops together, working side by side, Kiona playing nearby, her leg fully healed. One evening in late April, Father O'Brien came calling with papers. The Northern Pacific Railway has been fined heavily by the federal government, he explained. Part of that fine includes compensation for families of those killed by Marcus Cole. As the only surviving members of the Chiricahua band, you are entitled to $5,000. Maka stared. 5,000? It is not enough, Father O'Brien said quietly. No money can compensate for 52 lives. But it is something, a way to build a future. That night, Ethan and Maka sat by the fire holding the banknote. We could expand the farm, Ethan said, buy more land, livestock, build a bigger house. Or we could help other Apache, Maka said. There are still bands hiding in mountains, running from soldiers, starving. We could provide food, shelter. They talked long into the night, making plans, dreaming dreams. In the end, they did both. They expanded to 300 acres, built a larger house with separate rooms for children, and established a quiet sanctuary for Apache families who needed safe rest during travels. It was never advertised, never spoken of openly, but word spread. Ethan Reeves's homestead was a place of safety where old laws did not apply, where Apache and white lived together in peace. As Maka's pregnancy progressed, Ethan found himself constantly amazed. He had missed this with Sarah, been away when Sarah was in her final months, come home to find her dead before he got to see his child move in her womb. But now, lying in bed at night with his hand on Maka's swollen belly, he felt his son or daughter kick, and it filled him with wonder so profound it left him speechless. Kiona was fascinated, talking to the belly in a mix of Apache and English, telling the baby about the farm, about the sheep, about her father Ethan, who saved them all. In October, on a cool autumn morning when the oak tree's leaves had turned gold, Maka went into labor. Father O'Brien had arranged for a midwife from Red Creek, Mrs. Henderson, who had delivered half the babies in the territory. The labor lasted through the night and into the next day. Ethan paced the porch, unable to go inside, unable to leave, listening to Maka's cries, terrified that history would repeat, that he would lose another wife, another child. But Maka was Apache, strong, resilient. When the sun reached its peak, a baby's cry split the air. Mrs. Henderson appeared at the door, tired but smiling. "You have a son, Mr. Reeves, healthy and strong, and your wife as well." Ethan nearly collapsed with relief. He stumbled inside to the bed where Maka lay exhausted but radiant, holding a small bundle in clean linen. She looked up and smiled, the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "Our son," she said softly. "Come meet your son." Ethan approached slowly, almost reverently, looked down at the tiny face. The baby had Maka's dark coloring, but Ethan's lighter eyes, a perfect blend of two worlds, two peoples, two souls who found each other against all odds. "What should we name him?" Maka asked. Ethan thought about everyone who brought them to this moment. Sarah, who taught him about love. Cole, who taught him about courage. Harvey, who taught him about redemption. Father O'Brien, who taught him about faith. "Nathan," Ethan said, "it means gift from God, because that is what he is, what you all are. Gifts I never thought I would receive." "Nathan," Maka repeated. "Nathan Reeves, it is a good name." Kiona climbed onto the bed, peering at her new brother with wide eyes. "He is so small," she said. "Was I that small?" "Smaller," Maka said with a laugh. "Will he stay with us forever?" Kiona asked. "Will he be my brother forever?" "Forever," Ethan promised. "We are a family now, all of us, and families stay together." That first winter with Nathan was hard in the way all winters with newborns are, full of sleepless nights, constant feedings, fear that something might go wrong. But it was also filled with joy, with the wonder of watching this small person grow day by day. Kiona took her role as big sister seriously, always wanting to hold Nathan, help feed him, sing him the Apache lullabies her mother taught her. She was 7 now, learning to read from books Father O'Brien brought, learning both Apache ways from her mother and white ways from Ethan. She was becoming something new. Neither wholly Apache nor wholly white, but a bridge between both worlds. One evening in December, there was a knock. Ethan opened the door to find Harvey Mills, hat in hand, looking nervous. "Evening, Ethan. Wondered if I might have a word." They stood on the porch, breath fogging in cold air. Harvey struggled with what he wanted to say. "I came to thank you," he said finally, "for not turning me away after what I did, for giving me a chance to make things right. Most men would have shot me on sight. Most men have never been desperate enough to betray their friends," Ethan said. "I understand why you did it." "Martha's doing better," Harvey continued. "The medicine is helping. Doctor says she might beat this. And I wanted you to know, if you ever need anything, you just ask. I owe you my life, my wife's life. That is a debt I can never fully repay." Ethan clapped Harvey on the shoulder. "You already repaid it by helping rebuild. We are even, Harvey. More than even. We are neighbors, friends." After Harvey left, Ethan went inside to find Maka nursing Nathan by the fire. Kiona curled beside her, half asleep. A scene of such perfect domestic peace, it made his chest ache. Maka looked up and smiled. "What were you and Harvey talking about?" "Forgiveness," Ethan said, "and second chances." He sat beside her, arm around her shoulders, looking into the fire. "4 years ago, I thought my life was over. I thought I would spend the rest of my days alone. I could not imagine any other future." He looked at Maka, then Kiona, then Nathan. "But look at us now. This is not the life I planned. It is better, it is richer, it is filled with love I never thought I would feel again." "Do you still think about her?" Maka asked. "About Sarah?" "Sometimes," Ethan admitted, "but not with pain anymore. Just gratitude for the time we had. She taught me how to love. Without her, I would not have known how to do that with you." Maka leaned her head against his shoulder. "In Apache culture, we believe people who die stay with us in spirit, watching over us. I think Sarah is glad you found happiness. I think she sent us to you." "Maybe she did," Ethan said. "Maybe that is why everything happened the way it did." They sat in comfortable silence, fire crackling, Nathan making small, contented sounds, Kiona breathing deep and even in sleep. Outside, wind howled around the cabin, but inside they were warm, safe, protected. They had fought for this peace, bled for it, nearly died for it, but they had won. And now, sitting together in the firelight, they were not just surviving. They were living. Really living. Spring came again, bringing new life and new challenges. Nathan was walking now, toddling around on unsteady legs, getting into everything, making Kiona laugh. Ethan expanded the farm again, planting wheat and corn and vegetables enough to feed not just his family, but the occasional Apache travelers who still stopped, seeking refuge. Father O'Brien came regularly, bringing news from outside. The Northern Pacific Railway had been forced to reroute their tracks, public outcry too great. The land that had belonged to Maka's tribe was being set aside as protected territory, a memorial to those who died. The territory was changing, slowly but surely. It would never be perfect, never free of prejudice and violence, but it was better. And sometimes, Ethan thought, better was enough. One warm June evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and gold, Ethan sat on his porch with Maka beside him, watching Kiona teach Nathan how to identify animal tracks in the dirt. The children's laughter carried across the fields. "Do you ever regret it?" Ethan asked. "Marrying me? Staying here instead of going back to your people?" Maka was quiet, considering carefully. "I do not regret it," she said. "But I would be lying if I said I do not sometimes miss my people, my culture, the old ways. I miss speaking my language all the time, miss the ceremonies." She took his hand. "But I have also gained much. I have gained safety for my daughter. I have gained a husband who treats me as equal. I have gained a son who will grow up knowing both worlds. That is everything." "We could visit the reservation sometimes," Ethan offered. "Let Kiona and Nathan know their Apache heritage." "Could we?" Maka's voice was suddenly hopeful. "Why not? We are a legal family, and I think it is important the children know where they come from. All of where they come from." Maka's eyes filled with tears. She leaned over to kiss him. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for understanding." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of purple and pink, Ethan Reeves looked out across his land, his and Maka's land, and felt something he had not felt since Sarah died. Peace. Not the peace of an ending, but the peace of a life well lived, of promises kept, of love given and received. He had started this journey 4 years ago, standing at Sarah's grave, promising to keep going even when he did not know why. Now he knew why. He looked at Maka, at Kiona, at Nathan playing in the dirt, and he knew. This was why. Family, home, love. Not the family he had planned, not the home he had imagined, not the love he thought he would find, but better, richer, more real. And as the stars began to emerge one by one in the darkening sky, Ethan Reeves made a new promise. Not on a grave this time, but to the living people beside him. He would protect them. He would love them. He would build with them a future worth fighting for. And this time he would not fail. This time he would live. Really live.